Hello, welcome to Ellroy Reads. This is the show where every week I look at a book that was an influence to James Ellroy, a book that moved him, thrilled him, inspired him. Firstly, a big welcome to our new subscribers, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and you'll have all of the episodes and all of the content delivered right to your inbox. I have a very special show for you this week because I'm going to be talking about one of my own books. The book in question is 100 American Crime Writers. And I'm going to be giving you a lot of behind the scenes content, a lot of, kind of making of gossip and stories like that. But firstly, I want to tell you a little bit about one of James Ellroy's publicity rules that also applies to me in this show. When James Ellroy is touring a book, doing any publicity for a book, say one of his recent books like The Storm or The Enchanters, he has a very strict rule. He will only talk about that particular book. He doesn't want to answer questions about his backlist. He wants to talk about the book that he's promoting now. And the reason he does that is that he is very knowledgeable about how the publishing industry works. He knows he has a very short window to get his new novel on the New York Times bestseller list. Three or 4 months. And therefore he will push it and push it and push it. I mean, and I've seen him encourage readers to buy his books in the bookshop because that has greater sway on the New York Times list rather than buying them online. And I have a kind of similar rule, but not quite as severe as his. Firstly, I'm going to be telling you about this book, 100 American Crime Writers, which is the second book I ever did. But I also want you to go out and buy Love Me, Fear and Danger, The Life of James Ellroy. This is my most recent book. This is my proudest achievement. It is the life story of James Ellroy. It's also my most successful book in terms of sales and awards, reviews. It won the Edgar Award. And I'm still in the process of it's still fresh. Go out and buy it. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Okay, so little publicity rule over. 100 American Crime Writers was a very exciting project to work on. And I actually began working on it as a contributor. There was a different editor on the project, Chris, a colleague of mine who became a very good friend. He asked me to work on this project to write a few entries. So my involvement began as in a somewhat minimal way. And I said yes, I jumped at the chance. I was still writing my PhD, so it was a hugely exciting project for me at the time. And then some time passed, and Chris had a bad injury at the time. He's absolutely fine now. But he said, I've not been able to make any progress. I've not been able to really work on this. I think it's time for me to pass the baton. Would you be interested in editing the book in my place? I said, yeah, absolutely. This just is getting better and better as far as I'm concerned. In fact, Chris was editing another volume, 100 British crime writers and 100 American crime writers. So he gave this project to me, and he gave this project, 100 British crime writers, to Esme Miskimen, another colleague of ours. And I contributed a few articles in this one. But my life was completely consumed by 100 American crime writers. And so I became the editor. I think one of the reasons Chris chose me is because after he asked me to contribute, I then got the gig as the editor of Conversations with James Ellroy, which was my first ever book. And he was very impressed with that project, and he was watching it develop. And I mean, and then he said to me, look, I think you're the man for this job. So obviously he'd done a certain amount of work, which he passed on to me. He passed on all of his paperwork. And the basic thrust of the book is, it is mini biographies. It's an anthology or encyclopedia of prominent American crime writers. So he passed on his contributors to me. He must have had maybe 5, 6 contributors, maybe more. Unfortunately, right away, I lost one because the contributor's name was Frederick Zackel, who was a very good writer. And he just wasn't happy with the changes that were being made. He felt like he'd been blindsided by it. I tried my best to dissuade him from leaving, but he was great in the conversations I had with him when he was still briefly involved in the project. He had been encouraged to write by Russ MacDonald, his idol. He met him at a summer writing course in the mid 70s, and this is shortly before Russ MacDonald became very ill. And we'd asked him to write Russ MacDonald's bio for the book, and a few others, and he'd accepted. And I pleaded with him. I said, "No one knows more about Russ MacDonald than you. I mean, forget the biographers, forget Tom Nolan. No one," which he was very flattered with. But like, I mean, he told me some great stories. For instance, so Russ MacDonald, says to him, "You've got to write. You've got the gift. Don't give it up." So he does write. He has this hit novel, Cocaine and Blue Eyes, which is subsequently made into a television film with O.J. Simpson in the lead role, who also co-produced it. O.J. Simpson was a big believer in the project, and at the time, this is before he did the Naked Gun films, he wanted to be a serious actor. He lobbied very, very hard for a role in Ragtime, the adaptation of the Yellow Doctor novel. Anyway, it's slightly academic now, but Frederick Zacher would say to me, "I owe my success to Ross MacDonald and O.J. Simpson," and that's quite the pairing. So he left the project, but he did give me a parting gift, and that was, he said, "I know this guy. He knows so much about crime fiction. It's unbelievable." That man was Jeff Kingston Pierce, who many of the viewers of this show, readers of crime fiction, will know is the editor of The Rap Sheet, which has been, for the past 20 years now, the best online magazine of crime fiction, in my estimation. And I'm always honoured every time the few times I've managed to write for The Rap Sheet, write for Jeff. He's done a remarkable job in keeping it going. So Jeff comes on, he takes some contributors. I've inherited these contributors. I've inherited the list of American crime writers. The trickiest part was to decide which crime writers were prominent enough to go on a list of 100, because you could release a book called 1000 American Crime Writers and still have trouble getting some on and having to take names off. It was heartrending. So I looked at the list. I decided to take a few names off, which wasn't easy. I put a few names on, including a few newer names. I put on Megan Abbott's name, so we have a biography of Megan Abbott here, because to me, she was the new star of crime fiction, and she's going to be absolutely huge, and she has been. Maybe kind of bigger outside of crime fiction as well. She's a huge literary star. She's not going to be boxed in by any label. So I shook up the list, and in Megan's case and a few other cases, when the author was still living, we could contact them. Had an interview with Megan via email. Actually, my wife did, and I actually started a conversation with Megan that's kind of been on and off through the years, because when I came around to writing Ellroy's biography, Megan, is a very good friend of Ellroy, so she did a wonderful interview with me about Ellroy. She put me in touch with Jordan Harper, who's the absolutely new big star of crime fiction himself. In fact, only this week, She Rides Shotgun, a film adaptation of his novel, has come out. When I interviewed him 5 years ago, he was in the ascendancy for the Ellroy bio, but he was, I was interviewing mostly about his LA Confidential TV pilot, and since then he's absolutely soared. So the project was very good. The way we handled it is like I had two kind of grounding essays in it, which I wrote myself, that would contextualize American crime fiction, kind of like pre-war developments, post World War II, the pulp boom, the Black Mass magazine, obviously the paperback boom, increasing sophistication amongst crime writers and dealing with increasingly complex topics within the genre, and how crime fiction has really began to be taken seriously in the academy, is now not just taught on modules of English literature, English American literature. There are actually now crime fiction MAs, and crime fiction creative writing courses. So it is a happy day for our genre. It is, it's taken seriously, and believe me, every writer deep down wants to be taken seriously. And crime fiction is just massively successful. But we had to divide the the bios in this into 500 word bios, 1500 word bios, and 2500 word bios, just to make the word count work. Again, and I had another really, really difficult job of deciding if a crime writer's either fallen a bit from favor or it's a bit more obscure now, it'd be a 500 word bio. Obviously, the very, very important ones, it'd be 2,500 word bio. So I wrote the piece on James Ellroy myself. I made sure that was 2,500 words because I know that Ellroy is at the top of these writers. He's one of the most regarded. And the project came out really, really successful. A few years ago, I was moving house, and I was boxing everything up, and I came across this huge spreadsheet I had from the project. It was like massive, in which I had all of the names of the crime, all 100 names, and all of the names of the contributors next to them, and then tabulated first draft, second draft, third draft, final draft. It was absolutely huge. Project. I thought about keeping it, and then I was just like, what, the past is the past. So I put it in the bin. But like, it was a reminder of just how big this project was. And the book was successful. It was highly reviewed. There was one kind of hiccup, or more of a learning curve for me, is that the publisher Palgrave had said this is going to be a great coffee table book. So I was, very, very excited, and obviously people were reaching out to me to say they were excited when it was coming out. Then when it's published, it was the pricing was like $100 or more, and that's a lot to ask people, to spend on their disposable income. So I think we kind of lost readers then, because it was only initially it was hardback and ebook. There were two editions. I lobbied Palgrave hard for a paperback edition, and finally one has come out. But it took a few years, and by which time the momentum was gone. Is my comment about, you've got that short window, which brought the price down. But then I realized, being an academic publisher, this is par for the course. The book pricing for academic books is very, very high, because they know university libraries will pay that. They'll pay that for books, by the cubic yard if they want to put them on a module reading list. But the average reader doesn't pay that. So that was disappointing at the time. But it did put me on the path to doing James Ellroy, Love Me First in Danger, The Life of James Ellroy for Bloomsbury. I said to myself, I don't want to write a strictly academic book anymore. I want to write a strong narrative book, a through-line narrative where something on the first page is resolved on the last page, a real page-turning book. And some academic books are like that, but they're not necessarily written with that in mind. So I said to Bloomsbury, this is going to be a scholarly biography, but it's going to have an absolutely gripping narrative, because Ellroy's life is like that. And they agreed with me. And they also agreed that rather than a hardback, we go paperback, ebook, audiobook. Because the hardbacks, my editor felt that, hardbacks are kind of done. I know there's still people who disagree with me there, but he just felt, let's put this out there as many ways possible for people to buy it and at a reasonable price. So, Love Me First in Danger. And 100 American Crime Writers. It was a great project, and I'm very proud to have done it. Okay, thanks very much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, as I said. Next week I'll be back. I'll be looking at a novel. We'll be talking about how that has inspired James Ellroy. Okay, see you next time. Bye-bye.